The morning sun of Zarian Prime cast long shadows across the great halls of the Galactic Military Academy. Students from dozens of worlds walked through the corridors, their voices mixing in a dozen different languages. Some had scales that glittered in the light. Others had fur that changed color with their moods. A few looked almost like walking crystals that sang when they moved. Lisa Carter walked among them, her simple human form drawing curious looks. She was one of only 3 humans at the Academy, part of a new exchange program between Earth and the Galactic Council. Her brown hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and her green eyes showed the careful attention of someone who knew she was being watched. The classroom for advanced military history was large and circular, with seats arranged in rings that went up toward the ceiling. Professor Zethek stood at the center, his tall Centaurian frame making him look like a tree among flowers. His forearms moved as he spoke, and his large eyes seemed to see everything at once. Today we will study the Restricted Species Database, Professor Zethek announced. His voice was deep and carried easily through the room. This list contains every civilization that the Galactic Council has marked as too dangerous for normal contact. A student named Crix raised one of his 6 arms. He was Vorthan, with blue skin and silver eyes that never seemed to blink. Professor, why would any species be restricted? Surely the Council can handle any threat. Professor Zethek's expression grew serious. The Council has learned, through much pain and loss, that some species are better left alone, or approached with extreme care. He waved his hand, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. Names and pictures floated in the air, showing different alien races. Some looked like nightmares. Others seemed peaceful, but had warning symbols next to their names. The Krillian Empire, Professor Zethek pointed to a picture of tall, armored beings. They conquered 12 star systems before we learned to avoid them. The Void Hunters can travel through space without ships. The Hive Queens of Andromeda can control minds across entire planets. Lisa listened carefully, taking notes on her tablet. She had studied some of these species before coming to the Academy, but hearing about them from Professor Zethek made them seem more real and more frightening. Crix was scrolling through the list on his own device. Suddenly, he started laughing. The sound was like bells ringing, but not in a pleasant way. Professor, there must be a mistake here. What do you mean? Professor Zethek asked. This list says that humans are restricted. Crix's laughter grew louder. Homo sapiens from planet Earth. They're marked as dangerous as the Krillian Empire. The classroom fell silent for a moment. Then other students began to look at their own devices. Soon, soft chuckles and whispers filled the room. Vex, a reptilian saurian with green scales and yellow eyes, hissed with amusement. This cannot be correct. Humans have barely learned to leave their own planet. They still fight wars with chemical weapons and metal projectiles. They don't even have a unified government, added Nith, whose crystalline body sparkled as she spoke. How can they be dangerous to anyone but themselves? Lisa felt her cheeks grow warm. She kept her eyes on her tablet, pretending to take notes, but she could feel the stares of her classmates. She had expected some of this when she applied to the Academy. Humans were new to the galactic community, and most aliens saw them as primitive and weak. Perhaps, said a student named Korth, whose tentacles moved as he spoke, they were added to the list by mistake. Maybe someone meant to put them on the protected species list instead. The laughter grew louder. Even students who usually stayed quiet were joining in. Lisa noticed that Professor Zethek was not laughing. Instead, he was watching the class with an expression she could not read. I mean, look at their planet, Vex continued. It's mostly water, and they can't even breathe underwater. They need special suits to survive in space for more than a few minutes. Their strongest warriors can't even lift as much as a saurian. Child, Crix brought up more information on the holographic display. Their largest military force has only 1.4 million soldiers. My homeworld's police force is 3 times that size. And they split their military into different groups that sometimes fight each other. Their weapons are so primitive, laughed Nith. They shoot tiny pieces of metal through tubes using explosions. Meanwhile, we have energy weapons that can cut through starship hulls. Lisa wanted to speak up, to defend her species, but she did not know what to say. Everything the other students were saying was true, in a way. Humans were new to space travel. They did fight among themselves. Their technology was behind that of most galactic civilizations. But something about their laughter made her angry. It was not just teasing. It was the kind of laughter that said humans were not worth taking seriously at all. They can't even agree on what to call their planet, Korth added. Some call it Earth. Others call it Terra. How can you be dangerous if you can't even name your own world? Professor Zethic finally spoke. That is enough. His voice was quiet, but it carried such authority that the room went silent immediately. You speak of things you do not understand. But Professor, Crix protested, surely you can see that humans don't belong on the restricted list. They're harmless. The old Centaurian's eyes seemed to grow darker. Harmless, he repeated slowly. Yes, that is what many thought. That is what the Council thought 47 years ago. Lisa looked up from her tablet. Something in Professor Zethic's voice made her pay attention. It was not anger, exactly, but something deeper. Something that might have been fear. Professor? Vex asked. What happened 47 years ago? Professor Zethic was quiet for a long moment. He looked at each student in turn, his forearms folded across his chest. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft. Perhaps it is time you learned why humans are truly on that list. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the students who had been laughing loudest seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. Lisa felt her heart beating faster. She had never heard this story before. In all her studies of human history, she had never learned about anything that happened 47 years ago. That would put humans on a galactic restricted list. Professor Zethic moved to his desk and began. Accessing files that Lisa could see were marked with high security symbols. What you are about to learn is classified at the highest levels of galactic government. Few beings in the galaxy know this story. He looked directly at Lisa. Not even most humans know what really happened during the Kepler campaign. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she prepared to take notes. Around her, her classmates had stopped laughing entirely. The mood in the room had changed from amusement to something that felt almost like dread. The story I'm about to tell you, Professor, Zethic continued, will explain why the Galactic Council fears humanity, and why that fear may be the only thing keeping the galaxy safe. The next day, Lisa walked into the tactical simulation lab with heavy steps. Word had spread through the academy about Professor Zethic's mysterious comment, but classes had ended before he could explain what happened 47 years ago. Now, the other students were more curious than ever about humans, but not in a good way. Jake Morrison was already in the lab when Lisa arrived. He was the second human exchange student, a tall young man with short black hair and serious dark eyes. He looked up as Lisa entered and gave her a small nod. They had learned to stick together at the academy. Did you hear what they're saying in the dining hall? Jake asked quietly. Lisa shook her head. She had eaten alone in her room, as she often did when the stares became too much. They're making jokes about the big human secret, Jake said. They think Professor Zethic was just trying to make us feel better about being weak. Before Lisa could respond, the other students began filing into the lab. The room was set up like a military command center, with multiple screens and control panels. Today, They would be running battle simulations, testing different military strategies against historical enemies. Crix entered with his usual confidence, his silver eyes scanning the room until they found Lisa and Jake. "Well, well," he said loudly. "Enough for everyone to hear. The dangerous humans are here. Should we call for extra security?" Several students laughed. Vex hissed in amusement as he took his seat at one of the control panels. "Maybe we should run a simulation of humans versus a real military force. I wonder how long they would last." 3 minutes, suggested Nith, her crystalline form sparkling with what Lisa had learned was the equivalent of laughter. That might be generous. The simulation instructor, a mechanical being called Unit 7, began the day's lesson. "Today, we will analyze the military capabilities of different species. You will work in teams to design strategies for various historical conflicts." The students were divided into groups. Lisa found herself on a team with Jake, Crix, Vex, and 2 other aliens she did not know well. Their assignment was to study the military history of several species and compare their effectiveness. "Let's start with the Saurian battle legions," Crix suggested, pulling up information on his screen. "Now there's a real military force. They conquered 6 star systems using only ground troops. The holographic display showed Saurian soldiers. In action, they were twice the size of humans, with natural armor and claws that could tear through metal. Their weapons fired energy beams that could destroy vehicles with a single shot." "Impressive," Jake said, trying to sound interested. "Their tactics seem well coordinated." "Of course they are," Vex replied. "We've been perfecting warfare for thousands of years, unlike some species." The team moved through several other civilizations. The Vorthan Imperial Fleet with their massive warships, the Centaurian Star Guard with their advanced technology, the crystalline warriors of Andromeda who could reshape matter with their minds. Finally, they reached the section on human military forces. The moment the information appeared on screen, the mockery began again. "Look at this," Crix said, pointing to images of human soldiers. "They're so small and weak. They need to cover their entire bodies with artificial armor just to survive basic combat. And their weapons," Vex added with a hiss, "they still use gunpowder, actual explosions to push metal bullets through tubes. It's like something from the Stone Age." Lisa watched the images of human soldiers and felt a mix of pride and frustration. Yes, human technology was behind that of other species, but these soldiers looked brave and determined. They were doing their best with what they had. "Their aircraft can't even leave the atmosphere," laughed Nith. "They call them fighters, but they're just metal boxes with wings." Jake tried to defend their species. "Human military strategy has been effective in many conflicts. We've won wars against difficult odds. Against other humans," Crix pointed. "Out. That's like saying a child is strong because he can beat up other children." The alien students brought up more information. Human military budgets, compared to the resources of galactic civilizations, seemed tiny. The largest human armies were smaller than the security forces of most alien cities. "They don't even have energy shields," Vex observed. "They try to stop enemy weapons by hiding behind rocks and metal walls." "And look at their space program," Crix continued. "They've sent exactly 12 people to their own moon. 12. Most of our children go on field trips to other planets." Lisa felt her anger growing. Everything they were saying was technically true, but they didn't understand the context. Humans had achieved spaceflight without help from other species. They had built their technology from nothing, through centuries of hard work and innovation. They fight wars over things like water and patches of dirt, Nith said, her voice tinkling with amusement. "Meanwhile, we have machines that can create water from stardust and terraform entire planets." "I heard," said a student named Korth, that they still have something called nuclear weapons, bombs that destroy cities, but also poison the land. For decades. What kind of species builds weapons that hurt their own planet? The laughter grew louder. Lisa noticed that other teams were starting to listen to their conversation. Soon, half the class was focused on the joke, the human military might had become. Let's run a simulation, Crix suggested. Humans versus a real galactic threat. We can see how long they last. That would be cruel, Vex said, but his eyes were bright with amusement. They wouldn't survive the first encounter. Jake stood up, his face red with anger. You don't know anything about humans, he said. You think because our technology is different, we're weak. But you've never seen what humans can do when they're really threatened. Threatened by what? Crix asked. Your own species fights more. Wars among themselves than against any external enemy. If you can't even get along with each other, how could you face a real galactic threat? The Galactic Council had to intervene in 17 different human conflicts just in the last century, added Nith. They're more dangerous to themselves than to anyone else. Lisa finally found her voice. You're missing the point, she said. Yes, we fight among ourselves. But that's because we're passionate about our beliefs. We don't give up easily. Passion doesn't stop energy weapons, Vex replied. Passion doesn't make your ships faster or your armor stronger. The simulation instructor, Unit 7, had been listening to the conversation. Perhaps, it said in its mechanical voice, you would like to test your theories. I can create a scenario where human forces face a galactic-level threat. The students' eyes lit up with excitement. Yes, several of them said at once. I'll set the scenario, Crix volunteered. Humans defending their home planet against, let's say, a Devourer scout fleet. Just a small one. Lisa felt cold. She had studied the Devourers in her xenobiology classes. They were a hive-minded species that consumed entire worlds. A single Devourer ship could destroy a human city. That's not fair, Jake protested. The Devourers are one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Exactly, Crix said. If humans are really on the restricted list, they should be able to handle a small Devourer force, right? The simulation began. On the main screen, Earth appeared as a blue-green marble in space. Around it, the tiny dots of human satellites and space stations looked pathetic compared to the dark shapes of approaching Devourer ships. The alien students watched with growing amusement as the simulation played out. Human missiles bounced harmlessly off Devourer hulls. Human fighter jets were destroyed before they could even reach the enemy ships. The planet's defenses crumbled in minutes. Look, Vex pointed to the screen. They're already asking for help from the Galactic Council. They lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's longer than I expected, Nith said. I thought they would surrender immediately. Lisa watched the simulation with growing frustration. The program was based on current human capabilities, but it didn't account for human adaptability or creativity. It assumed humans would fight exactly like other species, using the same strategies and tactics. This isn't how it would really happen, she said. Of course it is, Crix replied. Your species has limited technology, limited resources, and limited experience with galactic-level threats. This simulation is based on factual data about human military capabilities. But it doesn't account for human ingenuity, Jake added. When humans are backed into a corner, they find ways to win that no one expects. The alien students laughed again. Ingenuity doesn't stop plasma cannons, Vex said. Creativity doesn't make your ships faster than light. Unit 7 reset the simulation. Perhaps you would like to try a different scenario. Humans versus a single Krillian battle cruiser? Even better, Crix said. One ship against an entire human fleet. The result was the same. The simulation showed human forces being destroyed, quickly and efficiently. The alien students cheered as each human ship disappeared from the screen. Lisa felt sick. She knew the simulations were unfair, but she couldn't explain why. There was something about humanity that these programs couldn't measure, something that made her species different from all the others. As the class ended, Professor Zithik appeared in the doorway. He had been watching the simulations, and his expression was unreadable. "Interesting exercises," he said quietly. "I trust you all learned something valuable too." The next morning, Lisa arrived at Professor Zethik's classroom early. She had barely slept, thinking about what the professor had said. The way he spoke about humans being uncivilized hadn't felt like an insult. It had felt like a warning. Jake was already there, sitting in the front row. He looked as tired as Lisa felt. "Did you research the Kepler campaign?" he asked as she sat down. "I tried," Lisa replied, "but there's almost nothing in the public databases. Just a few references to something called the Devour War about 47 years ago." Other students began filing into the classroom. Crix entered with his usual confidence, but Lisa noticed he seemed more curious than mocking today. Vex and Neith were talking quietly, and even they seemed less amused than usual. Professor Zethik entered exactly on time. His 4 arms carried several data devices that Lisa had never seen before. They were marked with security symbols that made her hands shake just looking at them. "Today," Professor Zethik began, "you will see something that few beings in the galaxy have witnessed. What you are about to observe is classified at the highest levels of galactic security. You will not discuss it outside this classroom. You will not record it. You will not share it with anyone." He moved to the center of the room and began connecting the devices to the holographic display system. "The footage you are about to see was recorded during the Kepler campaign 47 years ago. It shows humanity's first and only encounter with a galactic-level threat." The classroom lights dimmed. The holographic display activated, showing a star map with dozens of red markers scattered across it. "The Devourers," Professor Zethik said quietly. "A hive-minded species that consumes entire worlds. They appeared in the Outer Rim territories without warning, moving through star systems like a plague." The display zoomed in on one of the red markers. Lisa could see a planet that looked like Earth, covered in green and blue. Then the image changed, showing the same planet as a gray, lifeless rock. "They consumed everything," Professor Zethik continued. "The atmosphere, the water, the land itself. Nothing was left behind but empty space and dust." Crix raised his hand. "Professor, every species in the galaxy knows about the Devourers. They were stopped by the combined galactic fleet. What does this have to do with humans?" Professor Zethik's expression grew grim. "The combined galactic fleet tried to stop them. The Vorthan Imperial Navy, the Saurian Battle Legions, the Centaurian Star Guard, even the Crystal Warriors of Andromeda. Every military force in the galaxy was thrown against the Devourers." The display showed massive space battles. Thousands of ships fighting against dark, organic-looking vessels that moved like living things. Lisa watched in horror as galactic fleets were torn apart by the Devourer swarm. "We lost," Professor Zethik said simply. "Every engagement, every strategy, every weapon we had. The Devourers adapted to our tactics faster than we could change them. They learned from every battle and became stronger." The star map showed the red markers advancing deeper into galactic space. Dozens of civilizations fell. Billions of beings died or disappeared. The Galactic Council was desperate, Professor Zethik continued. The Devourers were moving toward the core worlds. At their rate of advance, they would reach the galactic capital within months. Jake leaned forward. "What stopped them?" Professor Zethik touched his control device. The display changed, showing a small blue-green planet in the Devourer's path. Earth, he said quietly. Humanity's homeworld was directly in the path of the Devourer advance. Lisa felt her heart sink. She could see what was coming. Earth was about to be consumed, just like all the other worlds. A council sent a message to Earth's government, Professor Zethek said. They offered to evacuate as many humans as possible to other worlds. They explained that the galactic military had failed to stop the Devourers, and that Earth would fall within days. The display showed the interior of what looked like a human spaceship. A woman in a military uniform stood at the center of a command bridge. She was middle-aged, with graying hair and tired eyes, but her posture was straight and confident. Admiral Kate Phillips, Professor Zethek said, commander of the human vessel UFS Defiance. She received the Council's message personally. The recording began to play. Admiral Phillips listened to the galactic message with no expression on her face. The message was clear. Earth could not be defended. The human government should prepare for evacuation immediately. Lisa expected to see panic or despair. Instead, Admiral Phillips turned to her crew with calm determination. "Understood," she said to the galactic messenger. "We thank the Council for their offer. However, we will not be evacuating." The alien students in the classroom stirred. Vex hissed softly in confusion. "They're staying to die?" he asked. "No," Admiral Phillips continued on the recording. "We'll handle this ourselves." The galactic messenger's voice showed surprise. "Admiral Phillips, you don't understand. The Devourers have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. Your technology cannot stop them." Admiral Phillips smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "With respect, you don't understand humans. We've never fought the Devourers before. That means we don't know it's impossible to beat them." The recording switched to show Earth from space. What Lisa saw next made her gasp. Instead of panic or evacuation, the planet was mobilizing for war. Within 6 hours of receiving the Council's message, Professor Zethek narrated, Earth's entire industrial capacity shifted to war production. Every factory, every resource, every citizen became part of the war effort. The display showed human cities transforming. Car factories began building military vehicles. Electronics plants started producing weapons. Even clothing factories were making military uniforms and equipment. "This is impossible," Nith said, her crystalline form flickering with disbelief. "How can a single planet mobilize so quickly?" "Because," Professor Zethek replied, "humans had been preparing for this moment. For their entire history. Not for the Devourers specifically, but for the possibility of extinction. Every human learns from childhood that survival requires sacrifice and cooperation." The recording showed human soldiers training in environments that made the alien students uncomfortable. They practiced fighting in poisonous gas. They learned to fight in the dark, in extreme heat, in freezing cold. They trained to fight when wounded, when outnumbered, when surrounded. Their training violates 17 galactic conventions on warfare, Professor Zethek noted. They practice techniques that most species consider barbaric or impossible. Jake was watching the recording with growing pride. "They're learning to fight dirty," he said. "Yes," Professor Zethek agreed. "Humans don't fight to win battles. They fight to survive. There's a difference." The recording showed human engineers working around the clock to modify their weapons. They were combining human technology with alien technology salvaged from previous galactic conflicts. The results looked crude and dangerous, but they were effective. Commander Ryan Hayes, Professor Zethek said as the recording focused on a young human officer. He coordinated the construction of orbital defense platforms using converted civilian infrastructure. Apartment buildings became weapons platforms. Sports stadiums became military bases. Lisa watched in amazement as humans transformed their entire civilization into a war machine. Children were evacuated to underground shelters that looked more like military bunkers. Elderly people worked in factories producing ammunition. Scientists developed new weapons using principles that made the alien students uncomfortable. They're using biological weapons, Vex said with disgust. Chemical weapons, even radiation weapons. These are banned by galactic law. Galactic law, Professor Zethek said quietly, was written by species that had never faced extinction. Humans were not part of the galactic community when these laws were made, and they were facing an enemy that certainly didn't follow them. The recording showed Admiral Phillips addressing her growing fleet. Ships that had been civilian transports were now covered in weapons. Space stations had been converted into mobile battle platforms. Even small personal spacecraft had been armed. And armored. We're not just fighting for Earth, Admiral Phillips said to her forces. We're fighting to show the galaxy that some species will never accept defeat. We're fighting to prove that extinction is not inevitable. The human fleet was unlike anything the alien students had ever seen. The ships were mismatched, hastily armed, and looked like they might fall apart at any moment. But there were thousands of them, and they were crewed by beings who had nothing left to lose. The Devourer swarm arrived at Earth's outer system exactly 72 hours after the Council's warning, Professor Zethek said. They expected to find a helpless planet ready for consumption. The recording showed the dark, organic shapes of Devourer ships emerging from faster-than-light travel. They moved like living things, flowing through space in patterns that hurt to look at. Instead, Professor Zethek continued, they found this. The display showed the human fleet rising to meet them. Thousands of ships, all different sizes and designs, moving in formations that looked chaotic, but were actually carefully planned. Admiral Phillips' voice came through the recording one last. Time before the battle began. All ships, this is Admiral Phillips. Today, we teach the galaxy that humanity will never bow to extinction. Today, we yes. Lisa could barely concentrate on her other classes that day. The image of human ships charging toward the Devourer swarm kept playing in her mind. She had never felt more proud or more afraid of her own species. When she entered Professor Zethek's classroom the next morning, she found the other students already deep in discussion. For the first time since she had arrived at the academy, they were talking about humans with something other than mockery. I researched human military history last night, Crix was saying to Vex. They've been fighting wars for their entire recorded history, almost constantly. That's what I said before, Vex replied. They fight among themselves too much to be dangerous to others. No, Crix said slowly. I think I was wrong. They don't fight because they're primitive. They fight because they're good at it, really good at it. Jake and Lisa exchanged glances. The other students were starting to understand something the humans had always known about themselves. Professor. Zethek entered with the same classified devices as the day before. Today you will see the conclusion of the Battle of Earth, he announced. You will witness humanity's first encounter with a galactic-level threat, and you will learn why the outcome changed everything. The holographic display activated, showing the moment where yesterday's recording had ended. Human ships were charging toward the Devourer swarm, looking tiny and fragile compared to the organic monsters they faced. The first phase of the battle lasted 18 hours, Professor Zethek narrated. The Devourers expected it to last 18 minutes. The recording showed the human fleet engaging the Devourers in ways that violated every rule of galactic warfare. Instead of forming neat battle lines, human ships scattered in all directions, making it impossible for the Devourers to predict their movements. Captain Ben Foster, Professor Zethek said, highlighting a human officer on the screen. He led the first wave of attack ships. Instead of trying to destroy Devourer vessels, he focused on learning how they worked. The alien students watched in fascination as human ships performed suicidal attacks against Devourer hulls. The ships were destroyed, but not before transmitting detailed information about Devourer technology and tactics. They're studying their enemy during combat, Neith observed. Even while dying, they're gathering intelligence. Yes, Professor Zethick confirmed. Humans don't just fight. They learn. And they adapt faster than any species the galaxy has ever seen. The recording showed human engineers working frantically on Earth's surface, modifying weapons and tactics based on the intelligence from the battle. Within hours, new weapons were being produced and sent to the fleet. Lieutenant Sarah Murphy, Professor Zethick, pointed to a young human woman coordinating the weapon modifications. She developed new ammunition specifically designed to penetrate Devourer bioarmor. The weapons she created had never been tested before the battle. Vex hissed in discomfort. They're experimenting with untested weapons during combat? That's insane. That's human, Jake said quietly. When we're desperate, we try things that other species wouldn't consider. The recording showed the second phase of the battle. Human ships began using tactics that made the alien students uncomfortable. They rammed Devourer vessels, exploding their own ships to damage the enemy. They used their dead ships as weapons, setting them on collision courses with Devourer formations. They're sacrificing themselves, Crick said in disbelief. Entire crews are dying just to slow down the enemy. Not just to slow them down, Professor Zethick corrected, to learn from them. Every human death provided information that helped the survivors fight more effectively. The display showed Admiral Phillips coordinating the battle from her command ship. She was receiving reports of massive human losses, but her expression never changed. She continued giving orders, moving ships and resources like pieces on a chess. Bored, Admiral Phillips lost 60% of her fleet in the first day, Professor Zethick noted. Any other species would have retreated or surrendered. Instead, she used the loss to reorganize her remaining forces into a more effective fighting unit. The recording showed human civilians on Earth working to support the battle. Factories were producing weapons around the clock. Scientists were developing new technologies in hours that should have taken years. Even children were contributing, helping to manufacture ammunition and equipment. Their entire civilization became a war machine, Professor Zethick explained. Every human being was part of the military effort. They didn't have soldiers and civilians. They had fighters and support fighters. Lisa felt a chill as she watched her species transform into something she had never seen before. The humans in the recording looked like the people she knew, but they were acting with a unity and determination that seemed almost inhuman. This is the part that frightened the Galactic Council, Professor Zethick said. Not just human tactics or technology, but their complete commitment to survival. They didn't hold anything back. They used every resource, every person, every idea they had. The recording showed the third phase of the battle. Human ships were now using weapons that looked like they had been cobbled together from scrap metal and alien technology. They were crude and dangerous, but they were working. Commander Ryan Hayes, Professor Zethick, highlighted another human officer. He developed a new type of ship that could be built in 6 hours using materials from destroyed Devourer vessels. The humans were literally building their fleet from the corpses of their enemies. The alien students were silent now, watching, with growing unease as humanity revealed capabilities they had never imagined. Dr. Amanda Clark, Professor Zethick said, showing a human scientist working in what looked like a battlefield laboratory. She was studying live Devourer prisoners, while the battle raged around her. Her research led to the development of humanity's most effective weapon. The recording showed Dr. Clark working with captured Devourer biomaterial. She was performing experiments that made the alien students look away in discomfort. She discovered that the Devourer's hive-mind connection could be turned against them. Professor Zethek explained. By introducing certain biological agents into their system, she could cause cascade failures throughout their fleet. Vex was shaking his head. They're using biological warfare against a hive mind. That's not just illegal. It's cruel. The Devourers were consuming entire planets, Jake pointed out. They weren't going to be stopped by following galactic law. The recording showed the fourth phase of the battle. Human forces had been reduced to less than 30% of their original strength, but they were now fighting with weapons and tactics that were specifically designed to kill Devourers. Colonel Nick Watson, Professor Zethek said, focusing on a human commander leading a group of ships that looked more like flying weapons than spacecraft. He led the final assault on the Devourer command vessel. His entire squadron was killed in the attack, but they succeeded in delivering Dr. Clark's biological weapon. The display showed the moment when the biological weapon took effect. The Devourer ships began to slow, then stop, then drift helplessly in space. The hive mind that had controlled them was failing. The cascade failure spread through the entire Devourer fleet, Professor Zethek narrated. Within hours, every Devourer ship in the system was dead or dying. The alien students watched in stunned silence as the mighty Devourer swarm, which had destroyed half the galaxy, was systematically eliminated by a species that had been considered primitive and harmless. But that's not the end of the story. Professor Zethek continued. The victory at Earth was just the beginning. The recording showed the aftermath of the battle. The human fleet, reduced to a few hundred ships, was receiving a message from the Galactic Council. Admiral Phillips appeared. On screen again. She looked exhausted, wounded, and much older than she had at the beginning of the battle. But her eyes were still sharp and determined. Admiral Phillips, the Council's message began. The galaxy owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. We formally request that Earth join the Galactic Council as a full member. We also request that human military forces assist in eliminating the remaining Devourer fleets in other sectors. The alien students leaned forward, expecting to hear Admiral Phillips accept the invitation with gratitude. Instead, she smiled that same cold smile they had seen at the beginning of the battle. We appreciate the offer, she said calmly. But we'll stay home for now. We have some rebuilding to do, and we need to figure out how to make sure this never happens again. She paused, looking directly at the camera. Call us if you need us, but next time we'll be ready. The recording ended. The classroom was completely silent. Professor Zethek looked at each student in turn. That message was sent 47 years ago. The Galactic Council has been debating what to do about humanity ever since. Crix raised his hand slowly. What happened to the other Devourer fleets? They disappeared, Professor Zethek replied. Within 6 months of the Battle of Earth, every Devourer in the galaxy was gone. The Council assumed they had fled to another galaxy or died out naturally. The old Centaurian paused, letting the implications sink in. It wasn't until years later that we learned the truth. Humans had been quietly hunting down and eliminating every Devourer they could find. They had turned their entire civilization into a weapon-designed spare. The next morning, Lisa noticed that the other students looked at her and Jake differently. There were no more jokes about human weakness. No more laughter about primitive weapons. Instead, there were quiet conversations that stopped when they over. Humans walked by. Professor Zethek's classroom felt different too. The usual energy of young students debating and learning had been replaced by something more serious, more respectful. Today, Professor Zethek announced, we will conclude the story of the Kepler campaign. You will learn why the Galactic Council made the decision to place humanity on the restricted list, and why that decision may be the most important one in galactic history. The holographic display activated one final time. Instead of showing Space battles, it showed a quiet conference room filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The Galactic Council Emergency Session, Professor Zethek narrated, held 6 months after the Battle of Earth, when the full extent of human capabilities became clear. The recording showed council members discussing what they had learned about humanity. The representatives looked tired and worried. Several species that Lisa recognized as powerful and confident now seemed nervous and uncertain. The humans eliminated the Devourer threat completely. One council member was saying, not just the fleet that attacked Earth, but every Devourer in the galaxy. They hunted them down systematically, using methods that we still don't fully understand. Another representative spoke up. We've analyzed the wreckage of Devourer ships found in 17 different sectors. The weapons used to destroy them don't match any known technology. The humans developed new ways to kill them for each encounter. Lisa felt a mix of pride and unease. She had never known that humans had continued fighting after defending Earth. The concern, continued another council member, is not just what humans did to the Devourers. It's how quickly they did it. They went from a single-planet species to a galactic threat in less than a year. Professor Zethek paused the recording. The council faced a dilemma. Humanity had saved the galaxy from the Devourers, but in doing so, they had revealed capabilities that frightened every other species. Crix raised his hand. What kind of capabilities? The ability to mobilize completely, Professor Zethek replied. The ability to adapt faster than any known species. The ability to study enemies and develop specific weapons to kill them. And most importantly, the ability to pursue total victory instead of just survival. The recording resumed, showing a human representative addressing the council. It was Admiral Phillips, looking older and more worn than in the battle recordings. We understand the council's concerns, she was saying. Humanity has capabilities that make other species uncomfortable. We've proven that we can eliminate galactic-level threats when necessary. A Vorthan representative interrupted. Admiral Phillips, the concern is not just about your military capabilities. It's about your willingness to use them. The Devourers were a threat to all life in the galaxy, yet humanity was the only species willing to pursue their complete elimination. Admiral Phillips nodded slowly. That's correct. We don't believe in leaving threats partially defeated. When something tries to destroy us, we make sure it can never try again. The council chamber fell silent. Lisa could see the fear in the representatives' faces. They were realizing that humanity operated by different rules than other galactic species. We're not asking you to change, another council member said carefully. We're asking you to consider voluntary restrictions on your expansion and military development. You're asking us to stay on our home planet, Admiral Phillips replied. To limit our technology and our growth. To accept that we're too dangerous. To be part of the galactic community. The Centauran representative spoke up. Admiral Phillips, every species in this chamber has seen what happens when humans feel truly threatened. You don't just defend yourselves. You eliminate the threat. Completely, no matter what it takes. Admiral Phillips was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but firm. That's exactly right. When something threatens human survival, we don't stop until it's gone. We don't negotiate with extinction. The recording showed the council representatives exchanging worried glances. They were dealing with a species that didn't think like them, didn't fight like them, and didn't accept limitations like them. The council's offer is this, the Vorthan representative said. Earth will be classified as a restricted world. Humans will be allowed to develop within their own solar system, but expansion beyond that will require council approval. In exchange, the galaxy will provide you with trade opportunities and technological assistance. Professor Zethek paused the recording again. The council was trying to find a way to benefit from human capabilities without giving humans the freedom. To use them, Jake frowned. That doesn't sound like a fair deal. It wasn't, Professor Zethek agreed. But Admiral Phillips accepted it anyway. The recording resumed, showing Admiral Phillips' response. A council's terms are acceptable, she said. Humanity will respect the restrictions placed on us. We'll stay in our solar system and develop our technology within those limits. The relief in the council chamber was obvious. The representatives seemed to think they had solved their problem. However, Admiral Phillips continued, I want the council to understand something. These restrictions aren't chains. They're not limitations on human power. They're protection for the galaxy. The chamber grew quiet again. What do you mean? Asked the Centaurian representative. Admiral Phillips smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. The restrictions you're placing on humanity aren't to keep us weak. They're to keep us peaceful. As long as we're allowed to develop in our own space, as long as our home is safe, we have no reason to expand or fight. She paused, looking at each representative in turn. But if humanity is ever threatened again, if our home is ever in danger, these restrictions will disappear. And when that happens, the galaxy will see what we're really capable of. The recording ended with Admiral Phillips leaving the council chamber. The representatives sat in silence. Finally understanding what they had just agreed to, Professor Zethek turned to face his students. That was 47 years ago. Since then, humanity has honored the restrictions completely. They've remained in their solar system, developed their technology quietly, and caused no trouble for anyone. Vex hissed softly. But they're still on the restricted list. Yes, Professor Zethek confirmed. Because the Council learned an important lesson from the Kepler campaign. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't their technology or their tactics. It's their restraint. Lisa felt confused. Our restraint? Think about it, Professor Zethek said. In the 47 years since the Battle of Earth, humans have developed technology that surpasses most galactic civilizations. They've built weapons that could destroy entire star systems. They've created ships that could travel faster than any known vessel. The alien students were staring at Lisa and Jake with new expressions. Not mockery or amusement, but something that looked like fear. But they've never used any of it, Professor Zethek continued. They've never expanded beyond their solar system. They've never threatened anyone. They've never even defended themselves against the smaller species that mocked them. Crix spoke up quietly. Because they don't need to. Exactly, Professor Zethek sighed. Humanity chooses to appear weak because it serves their purposes. They let other species think they're primitive and harmless. But the truth is, they're the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they have the power to destroy it and the wisdom not to. Nith's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. So the restrictions are not restrictions on human power. Professor Zethek finished. They're a promise. As long as the galaxy doesn't threaten humanity, humanity won't threaten the galaxy. It's not a treaty between equals. It's a predator choosing not to hunt. The classroom was completely silent. The alien students were processing what they had learned, and the implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy benefits from human restraint, Professor Zethek continued. We trade with them. We study their culture. We even send our students to learn from them. But we do it knowing that we exist only because they allow it. Lisa felt strange. She had come to the academy feeling inferior to the other species, ashamed of humanity's limitations. Now she was learning that those limitations were voluntary. The Galactic Council reviews the human restrictions every 10 years, Professor Zethek said. Every time they vote to keep them in place. Not because they don't trust humans, but because they're terrified of what would happen if humans decided they were no longer necessary. Jake asked the question that everyone was thinking. What would happen? Professor Zethek's expression grew very serious. Based on what we learned from the Kepler campaign, the Council estimates that an unrestricted humanity could conquer the entire galaxy within 50 years. Not through aggression or expansion, but simply by being better at survival than anyone else. The old Centaurian moved to the center of the room. "That's why you're here," he said to Lisa and Jake. "The exchange program isn't just about education. It's about the galaxy learning to understand humanity. Because the Council knows that someday the restrictions might end." "When?" Lisa asked. "When humanity decides they're in,"